everyone, welcome to Terrors at Twilight with Miss Cheryl. Tonight's reading is The Handle by Roberta Simpson Brown. When Ernie Myers heard the clunking sound against his window, he knew he was in for the biggest trouble of his life. He didn't need to look out. He knew what it was and who was throwing it. He even knew why. He hadn't dared to tell anyone at first. Now he didn't know what to do. He wished somebody else knew what was happening. He knew that his mother suspected that something awful was troubling him. She had even backed off from scolding him about the condition of his room last Saturday. She had come to call him for dinner, and she noticed the dirty old handle in the middle of the floor in front of his dresser. "Ernie, what on earth is this?" she asked. "Just a handle, Mom," Ernie answered, looking up from his baseball card. "I can see that," she said impatiently, "but where did it come from and what's it doing here?" "You don't want to know, Mom," thought Ernie. "Believe me, you don't want to know." Aloud he said, "Just something of Jason's." "I'm sorry, honey," she said. Ernie looked from his mother back to his baseball cards and put the ones he'd gotten from Jason under the stack. Ernie had actually been pretending that the handle wasn't there. He'd seen it on the floor when he first woke up, but he didn't want to touch it. All day he walked around it. It upset him to see it there. He was glad his mother didn't pursue the matter, even though she must have sensed his uneasiness. She just reached down, picked up the handle, and placed it on the windowsill. A cool breeze blew, billowing out the curtains, making them look like a ghost. The handle toppled off the sill and fell to the ground, startling Ernie's mother. She wanted to ask Ernie more about the handle, but she decided the time was just not right. Instead, she smiled at Ernie. "Come to dinner," she said. She waited while Ernie put his cards away and joined her. The curtains were still billowing out at him when they left the room. Ernie would have liked to believe that he would never see the handle again, but he knew he would. He wished he could tell his parents what was happening, but he didn't know how they could help. Nobody could help him now. All he could do was wait. After dinner, he went into the living room to watch TV. He didn't feel brave enough to go back to his room just yet. He could hear his parents in the dining room talking about him and the handle. They didn't know the significance of the handle, but they were worried about him. They blamed his moody behavior on the shock of the accident that had killed his best friend, Jason York. He was indeed thinking about his friend's death, but he wasn't missing him. He couldn't tell his parents because they wouldn't understand, but he wasn't missing Jason because Jason was back. Jason's funeral had been on Sunday, but on Monday morning, Ernie had seen him on the corner at the bus stop, 1 block from the school. Ernie had run to meet him at first, just as he always had, forgetting that Jason was dead. As Ernie got close, Jason vanished. Ernie couldn't find a trace of him except for the handle. Ernie knew at once what it was. It belonged to Jason. Ernie ought to know. He had stared at it long enough after Jason died. Ernie ran from the corner, leaving the handle on the sidewalk. He was breathless when he reached school, and he barely had time to open his locker before the bell. As he reached in and grabbed his science book, something slid out and hit the floor. It was the handle. It couldn't be. He left it on the sidewalk minutes ago, yet there it was. Ernie felt a cold breeze on the back of his neck, and he glanced over his shoulder. There stood Jason, looking just as he looked on the last day he was alive. Ernie blinked, and the vision was gone. He wanted to tell Jason that he was sorry, but how could you talk to someone who was dead? That was the last time Ernie went anywhere alone. As long as he was with other students, he hadn't seen Jason appear. He was beginning to feel safe. Then last Saturday, the handle had turned up in his room. After the handle fell out, Ernie slept with his window closed. Tonight he had heard the clunk against the window, and he knew the time he was dreading had come. Jason was back. Ernie didn't stir, but the clunking continued until the panes in the window rattled. He couldn't stand it. He had to see. He barely pulled the curtains open and peeked through. Just as he suspected, Jason was out there. "Jason, I'm sorry," Ernie whispered. "I'm sorry about the quarrel and the stupid baseball card. I'm sorry I did what I did. Go away, Jason. Please go away and leave me alone." Jason didn't move. Ernie began to shake with silent sobs. He thought about the last time he and Jason had been together. They had argued, but they had called a truce. Ernie had given Jason a ride home from school on the handlebars of his bicycle. All was going well until Jason laughed at the way he had outsmarted Ernie and gotten the one baseball card Ernie really wanted. Anger welled up in Ernie all over again. Jason didn't notice. He waved the card in the air and kept laughing at Ernie. Ernie didn't plan what happened. He jerked the handlebars, intending to jump Jason in the street. A truck came speeding out of nowhere at the same instant, and Jason went flying under the wheels. Out of all the confusion that followed, Ernie remembered only one thing clearly. Jason's baseball card was on the pavement, face up by the curb. Ernie reached down and put it in his pocket. He'd been sorry ever since, and now Jason was going to make him pay. Ernie could still see Jason standing in the yard, watching the window. He ran to his desk, grabbed the card, and held it up for Jason to see. "Here, you can have it back," said Ernie. Jason reached down and picked up the handle that had bounced back from the window when he'd thrown it. Earlier, he threw it again, this time with such force that it crashed through the glass. Ernie felt slivers from the pain slice his skin as they showered around him. Ernie dropped the card through the broken window. Jason made no move to pick it up. The card wasn't what he wanted. He raised his hand and motioned for Ernie to come out. "No, I won't go with you," screamed Ernie. He grabbed up the dirt-covered handle and shook it at the ghostly figure below. Jason motioned again. "Leave me alone," shrieked Ernie. "Get out of here." Ernie's parents burst into the room. They looked wild-eyed at the broken window and their hysterical son. "What's going on in here?" asked his father. Ernie couldn't answer. His father shook him gently. "Tell me," he insisted. "Make him go away," cried Ernie. "I gave him the card, but he doesn't want it now. He wants to take me with him." "What are you talking about?" asked his mother. "I killed Jason," he told her. "I didn't mean to. He's out there now. He's come back to get me. I don't want to go with him. I don't want to die." His mother put her arms around him. "Shh," she said. "You are going to be all right." His father crossed to the window and looked out. The yard was empty. "Whoever is out there is gone now," he said. His mother led him to the bed, but he still stood sobbing and clutching the handle. "What are you holding?" asked his mother. "Isn't that the same handle I saw in your room last week?" Ernie stopped crying and nodded. "Let me see it," said his father. "It's Jason," said Ernie. "He's brought it to me." "That's impossible," said his father. "Jason's dead. Where did this come from?" Ernie didn't answer because footsteps were coming towards the door. The doorknob turned, and the three stared as the door opened. Jason York stood in the doorway, and the stench of death filled the room. Ernie sank to the floor, and the handle dropped from his hand and lay still. His father knelt beside him. "He's fainted," said his father. "He'll be all right." "No," Ernie whispered, struggling to make them hear. "The handle." They leaned closer because his voice was fading. "The handle is Jason's," he said. "I saw it the day of the funeral. It's the handle from his coffin." Ernie stopped speaking and closed his eyes. His parents held each other and cried. A cold breeze blew through the broken window, dislodging particles of dirt from the handle and blowing them across the face of the dead boy. The end. I hope.
Tonight's terror is The Black Cat by Edgar Allan Poe. For the most wild yet homely narrative which I am about to pen, I neither expect nor solicit belief. Mad indeed would I be to expect it in a case where my very senses reject their own evidence. Yet mad I am not, and very surely do I not dream. But tomorrow I die, and today I would unburden my soul. My immediate purpose is to place before the world plainly, succinctly, and without comment, a series of mere household events. In their consequences, these events have terrified, have tortured, and have tormented me. Yet I will not attempt to expound them. To me they have presented little but horror. To many they will seem less terrible than Baroque's. Hereafter, perhaps, some intellect may be found which will reduce my phantasm to the commonplace. Some intellect more calm, more logical, and far less excitable than my own. which will perceive in the circumstances I detail with awe nothing more than an ordinary succession of very natural causes and effects. From my infancy, I was noted for the docility and humility of my disposition. My tenderness of heart was even so conspicuous as to make me the jest of my companions. I was especially fond of animals and was indulged by my parents with a great variety of pets. With these I spent most of my time and never was so happy as when feeding and caressing them. This peculiarity of character grew with my growth, and in manhood I derived from it one of my principal sources of pleasure. So cherished and affectionate of a faithful and sagacious dog, I need hardly be at trouble of explaining the nature or the intensity of the gratification thus derivable. There is something in the unselfish and self-sacrificing love of a brute which goes directly to the heart of him, who has had with occasion the best paltry friendship and possible fidelity of mere man. I married early, and was happy to find in my wife a disposition not uncongenial with my own. Observing my partiality for domestic pets, she lost no opportunity of procuring those of the most agreeable kind. We had birds, goldfish, a fine dog, rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. The Slaughter was a remarkably large and beautiful animal, entirely black and sagacious to an astonishing degree. And speaking of his intelligence, my wife, who at heart had who was not a little tinctured with superstition, made frequent allusion to the ancient popular notion which regarded all black cats as witches in disguise. But that she was ever serious upon this point, and I mentioned that matter at all for no other reason than that it happens just now to be remembered. Pluto, this was the cat's name, was my favorite pet. And playmate, I alone fed him. He attended me wherever I went about the house. It was even with difficulty that I could prevent him from following me through the streets. Our friendship lasted in this manner for several years, during which my general peppermint in character through the instrumentality of the fiend impertinence had, I was sure to confess it, experienced a radical alteration for the worst. I grew, day by day, more moody, more irritable, more regardless of the feelings of others. I suffered myself to use impertinent language as my wife. At length, I even offered her personal violence. My pets, of course, were made to feel the change in my disposition. I not only neglected, but I ill-used them. For Pluto, however, I still retained sufficient regard to restrain me from maltreating it, as I made no scruple of maltreating the rabbits, the monkey, or even the dog, when by accident, or through affection. The pain in my way, but my disease grew upon me, for what disease is like alcohol, and at length even Pluto, yes, dear Pluto, who was now becoming old and consequently somewhat peevish, even Pluto began to experience the effects of my ill temper. One night, returning home much intoxicated from one of my haunts about town, I fancied that the cat avoided my presence. I seized him, when in his fright at my violence, he inflicted a swift wound upon my hand with his teeth. The fury of a demon instantly possessed me. I knew myself no longer. My original soul seemed at once to take its place from my blood, and a murdered, fiendish outlet, skin nurtured, thrilled every fiber of my frame. I took from my waistcoat pocket a penknife, and I opened it. Grasped the poor beast by the throat, and deliberately cut out one of its eyes from the socket. I blushed, I burned, I shuddered like and at this damnable atrocity. When reason returned with the morning, which, when it had slept off the fumes of the night's debauch, I experienced sentiment half of horror and half of remorse for the crime of which I had been guilty, but it was at best a feeble and unequivocal feeling, and the soul remained untouched. I again plunged into excess, and soon drowned in wine all memory of the deed. In the meantime, the cat slowly recovered. The socket of the lost eye presented it. It is true, a frightful appearance, but he no longer appeared to suffer any pain. He went about the house as usual, but as might be expected, fled in extreme terror at my approach. I had submitted to my cold-hearted love, as to be first grieved by the evident dislike on the part of the creature which had once so loved me. But his feelings soon gave place to irritation, and then came, as if to my final and irrevocable overthrow, the spirit of perverseness. Of this spirit, philosophy takes no account. Yet, I am not more sure that my soul lives than I am that the perverseness is one of the primitive impulses of the human heart. One of the invisible primary faculties or sentiments which give direction to the character of a man, who has not, 100 times, found himself committed a vile or stupid action for no other reason than because he knows he should not. I would not a perpetual inclination in the teeth of our best judgment to violate that which is law, merely because we understand it to be such. The spirit of perverseness, I say, came to be my final overthrow. It was this unfathomable lounging of the soul to vex itself, to offer violence to its own nature, to do wrong for the wrong's sake, that urged me to continue and finally to consummate the injury I had inflicted upon the unoffending brutes. One morning, in cold blood, I slept loose about this night, hung it in a little dream. Hung it with the tears streaming from my eyes, with the bitterest remorse at my heart. Hung it because I knew that it had loved me. And because I felt that giving no reasonable offense, hung it because I knew that in doing so I was committing a sin, a deadly sin, that would so jeopardize my immortal soul, as the case if such a thing were possible, even beyond the range of the infinite mercy of the most merciful, the most terrible God. On the night of the day on which this most cruel deed was done, I was aroused from sleep with a cry of fire. The curtains of my bed were in flames. The whole house was blazing. It was with great difficulty that my wife, a servant, and myself made our escape from the conflagration. The destruction was complete. The entire worldly wealth was swallowed up, and I resigned myself, thenceforward, to despair. I am above the weakness of seeking to establish a sequence of cause and effect between the disaster and the atrocity, by detailing a chain of facts from which not to leave even a possible link imperfect. On the day succeeding the fire, I visited the ruins. The wall, with one exception, had fallen in. This succession was found in a compartment wall, not very thick, which stood about the middle of the house, and again stood at the head of my bed. The plastering here, in great measure, resisted the action of the fire, a fact which I attributed to it having been recently spread. About this wall, a dense crowd were collected, and many persons seemed to be examining a particular portion of it with very minute and eager attention. The word strange and singular and other similar expressions excited my curiosity. I approached and saw, as if that graded in bas relief upon the white surface, the figure of a gigantic cat. The impression was given with an accuracy truly marvelous. There was a rope about the animal's neck. When I first beheld this apparition, for I could scarcely regard it as less, my wonder and my terror were extreme. But at length, reflection came to my aid. The cat, I remembered, had been hung in a garden adjacent to the house. Upon the alarm of fire, this garden had been immediately filled by a crowd. By someone of whom the animal must have been cut from the tree and brought through an open window into my chamber. This I probably had done with the view of arousing me from sleep. Falling of other wolves had confessed the victim of my cruelty into the substance of the freshly scraped plaster, the lime of which, with the flame and the ammonia from the carcass, had been accomplished to the portraiture as I saw it. Although I thus wittily accounted to my reason, it not altogether my conscience, for the startling fact, just detail, it did not, the less fail to make a deep impression upon my fancy. For months I could not rid myself of the phantasm of the cat, and during this period there came back into my spirit a half sentiment, that seemed, but was not, remorse. I went so far as to forget the loss of the animal until it forgot me among the vile haunts. But I now habitually frequented, for another pet of the same species, and of somewhat similar appearance, this wished to supply its place. But one night, as I sat half stupefied in the tent of morbid infamy, my attention was suddenly drawn to some black object, reposing upon the head of one of the immense hogsheads of gin, or rum, which constituted the chief furniture of the apartment. I had been looking steadily at the top of the hogshead for some time, and what now caused me surprise was the fact that I had not sooner perceived the object thereupon. I approached it and touched it with my hand. It was a black cat, a very large one, fully as large as Pluto, and closely resembling him in every respect but one. Pluto had not a white hair upon any portion of his body, but this cat had a large, although indefinite splotch of white, covering nearly the whole region of the breast. Upon my touching him, he immediately arose, purred loudly, and rubbed against my hand, and appeared delighted with my notice. This, then, was the very creature of which I was in search. I at once offered to purchase it of the landlord, but this person made no claim to it, knew nothing of it, had never seen it before. I continued my caresses, and when I prepared to go home, the animal evinced a disposition to accompany me. I permitted it to do so, occasionally stooping and patting it as I proceeded. When it reached the house, it domesticated itself at once and became immediately a great favorite with my wife. For my own part, I soon found a dislike to it arising within me. This was just the reverse of what I had anticipated, but I know not how or why it was. Its evident fondness for myself rather disgusted and annoyed me. By slow degrees, these feelings of disgust and annoyance rose into the bitterness of hatred. I avoided the creature. A certain sense of shame and the remembrance of my former deed of cruelty prevented me from physically abusing it. I did not, for some weeks, strike or otherwise violently ill-use it. Gradually, very gradually, I came to look upon it with an unutterable loathing, and to flee silently from its odious presence as from the breath of a pestilence. What added no doubt to my hatred of the beast was the discovery on the morning after I brought it home that, like Pluto, it had also been deprived of one of its eyes. The circumstance, however, endeared it to my wife, who, as I have already said, possessed in a high degree the humanity of feeling which had once been my distinguishing traits. In the source of many of my simplest and curious pleasures, with my aversion to this cat, however, its partiality for myself seemed to increase. It followed my footsteps with a persistency which it would be difficult to make the reader comprehend. Whenever I sat, it would crouch beneath my chair, spring upon my knee, covering me with its loathsome caresses. If I arose to walk, it would get between my feet, and thus nearly throw me down, or fastening its long short claws into my dress, clamber in this manner to my breast. At such times, although I longed to destroy it with a blow, I was yet withheld from doing so, partly by a memory of my former crime, but chiefly, many confessed it at once, by absolute dread of the beast. This dread was not exactly a dread of physical evil, and yet I should be at a loss how otherwise to define it. I am almost ashamed to own, yes, even in this silenced cell, I am almost ashamed to own that the terror and horror with which the animal inspired me had been heightened by one of the merest tremors it would be possible to conceive. My wife had called my attention more than once to the character of the mark of white hair which I have spoken, and which constituted the sole visible difference between the strange beast and the one I had destroyed. The reader will remember that this mark, though large, had been originally very indefinite, but by slow degrees, nearly imperceptible, and which for a long time my reason struggled to reject as thinkable. It had, at length, assumed a rigorous distinctness of outline. It was now the representation of an object that I shuddered to name, and for this, above all, I loathed and dreaded, and would have rid myself of the monster had I dared. It was now, I say, the image of a haste, of a ghastly thing, of the gallows. Oh, mournful and terrible engine of horror, of crime, of agony, and of death! And now was I indeed wretched beyond the wretchedness of mere humanity. And a brute beast, whose fellow I had contemptuously destroyed, a brute beast, to work out for me, a man, fashioned in the image of the high God, so much of insufferable woe. Alas, neither by day nor by night knew I the blessing of rest any more. During the former, the creature left me no moment alone, and in the latter, I started hourly from dreams of unutterable fear to find the hot breath of the thing upon my face, and its vast weight an incarnate nightmare that I had no power to shake off, eternally upon my heart. Beneath the pressure of torments such as these, the feeble remnant of the good within me succumbed. Evil thoughts became my sole intimates, the darkest and most evil of thoughts. The moodiness of my usual temper increased the hatred of all things and of all mankind, while from the sudden and frequent ungovernable outburst of fury, which I now blindly abandoned myself, my uncomplaining wife, alas, was the most usual and most patient of sufferers. One day she accompanied me upon some household errand into the cellar of the old building, which our poverty could always turn habits. The cat followed me down the steep stairs, and nearly throwing me headlong, exasperating to madness. I was lifting an axe and forgetting in my wrath childish dread, which had hitherto stayed my hand, and aimed a blow at the animal, which, of course, would have proven instantly fatal had it descended, as I wished. But this blow was arrested by the hand of my wife. But in interference and rage more than demoniacal, I withdrew my arm from her grasp and buried the axe in her brain. She fell dead upon the spot, without ground. This hideous murder accomplished, I set myself forthwith with an entire deliberation to the task of concealing the body. I knew that I could not remove it from the house either by day or by night, without the risk of being observed by the neighbors. Many projects entered my mind. At one point, I thought of hiding the person from many fragments and destroying them by fire. At another, I resolved to dig a grave for it in the floor of the cellar. Again, I deliberated about passing it into the well in the yard, without packing it in a box as its merchandise, with the unusual arrangement, and without getting a porter to take it from the house. Finally, I hit upon what I decided was a far better expedient than either of these. I determined to wall it up in a cellar, as the monks of the Middle Ages are recorded to avoid of their victims. For a purpose such as this, the cellar was well adapted. Its walls were loosely constructed, and it had lately been plastered throughout with a rough plaster, which the dampness of the atmosphere had prevented from hardening. Moreover, in one of the walls was a projection caused by a false chimney or fireplace. It had been filled up and made to resemble the rest of the cellar. I had no doubt that I could readily displace the bricks at this point, insert the corpse, and wall up the hole as before, so that no eye could detect anything suspicious. And in this calculation, I was not deceived. By means of a crowbar, I easily dislodged the bricks, and having carefully deposited the body against the inner wall, I propped it in position with what, with a little trouble, relaid the whole structure as it originally stood, having prepared mortar, sand, and hair with every possible precaution. I prepared a plaster which could not be distinguished from the old, and with this I very carefully went over the new brick. When I had finished, I felt satisfied that all was right. The wall did not present the slightest appearance of having been disturbed. The rubbish on the floor was picked up with minuteness of care. I looked around triumphantly, and said to myself, here at least then, my labor has not been in vain. My next step was to look for the beast, which had been the cause of so much wretchedness, for I had, at length, firmly resolved to put it to death. Had I been able to meet with it at that moment, it could have been no doubt of its fate, but it appeared that the crafty animal had been alarmed at the violence of her previous anger and forebore to present itself in my present mood. It is impossible to describe or to imagine the blissful sense of relief which the absence of detested preservation did nightism did not make its appearance during the night, and thus for my night, at least, since its introduction into the house, I soundly and tranquilly slept. I slept, even with the burden of murder upon my soul. The second and third day passed, and still my tormentor came on. Once again, I breathed as a free man. The monster in terror had fled the premises forever. I should behold it no more. My happiness was supreme. The guilt of my dark deed disturbed me but little. Some inquiries had been made, but they seemed readily answered. Even a search had been instituted, but of course nothing was to be discovered. I looked upon my future felicity as secured. Upon the first day of the assassination, a party of the police came very unexpectedly into the house, and proceeded again to make rigorous investigation of the premise. Secure, however, in the inscrutability of my place of concealment, I felt no embarrassment whatever. The officer gave me accompanied them in their search. They left no nook or corner unexplored. At length, for the third or fourth time, they descended into the cellar. I quivered not any muscle. My heart beat calmly as that of one who slumbers in innocence. I walked the cellar from end to end. I folded my arms upon my bosom, and roamed easily to and fro. The police were thoroughly satisfied and prepared to depart. The glee at my heart was too strong to be restrained. I burned as if to say but one word. My way of triumph is to render doubly sure their assurance of my guiltiness. Gentlemen, I said at last, as the party ascended the steps, I delight to have allayed your suspicions. I wish you all health and a little more courtesy. By the by, gentlemen, this is a very well-constructed house. In the rapid desire to say something easy, I scarcely knew what I uttered at all. I may say an excellently well-constructed house. These walls, are you going, gentlemen? These walls are solidly put together, and here, through the mere frenzy of bravado, I rapped heavily with a cane, which I held in my hand, upon that very portion of the brick wall, behind which stood the corpse of my wife. But may God shield and deliver me from the fangs of the archfiend. No sooner had the reverberation of my blows sunk into silence than I was answered by a voice from within the tomb. By a cry, at first muffled and broken, like the sobbing of a child, and then quickly swelling into one long, loud, and continuous scream, utterly anomalous and inhuman. A howl, a wailing shriek, half of horror and half of triumph, such as might have arisen only out of hell, conjointly from the throats of the damned in their agony and of the demons that exult in damnation. Of my own thoughts it is folly to speak. Swooning, I staggered to the opposite wall. For one instant, the party on the stairs remained motionless. Through extremity of terror and awe, and the next, a dozen stout arms were toiling at the wall. I fell bodily. The corpse, already greatly decayed and clotted with gore, stood erect before the eyes of the spectators. Upon its head, with a red extended mouth and a solitary eye of fire, sat the hideous beast whose craft had seduced me into murder, and whose informing voice had consigned me to the hangman. I had walled the monster up within the tomb.